Joining us is Rollie Walters, Senior Research Fellow in Asia Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Rollie, welcome. First of all, in terms of trade, Beijing really is now feeling the pressure.
Well, I think that's a bit misguided. China has had this economic stagnation coming for years now. And it's kind of wrong to imply that the tariffs alone are causing China all this economic harm. Later this week, China is sending a delegation to the United States to talk about these outstanding trade issues. While it won't necessarily put a stop to the $16 billion worth of tariffs the United States will start collecting as of Thursday, it could potentially help put a pause to the $200 billion worth of goods that we might start taxing as early as September.
Well, they have so far. Once these new tariffs of $16 billion go into effect on Thursday, as you say, that's $50 billion of tariffs so far. As you say, potentially $200 billion down the line. And they're not really taking a sitting down. They've been talking about it and are retaliating themselves.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's only $50 billion, again, from our point, too. I mean, if you include the retaliatory tariffs from China, that's $100 billion. The United States, we've threatened $200 billion. The president has even quipped that he could go as far as every single item that Americans buy from China, which is $506 billion worth of goods in 2017. China, of course, doesn't buy that many goods from the United States, so they can't reciprocate to that level, but they would target at least in response to the $200 billion, half of every product that they buy. And so, we have this emerging trade war, and, hopefully the meetings that President Trump and President Xi could potentially have later this year could put a stop to it. But right now we need to lay the groundwork, and these meetings later this week are the right step in laying sort of the foundation for those talks.
But certainly the Chinese don't need this. I mean, they don't need any more pressure, any more tariffs, as you say and you point out. That their economy has been slowing down. We're seeing these videos of the empty cities and some empty factories. I mean, they're in a bit of trouble themselves.
You're right. I mean, that's what you get when you have decades of state guided markets. That's socialism. That's communism 101. I mean, that's what happens when you have these things. Regarding the currency, I mean, both by some measures, both the U.S. dollar and the Chinese yuan have actually been overvalued for many years now. So, in response to this outstanding trade issues and, of course, domestic economic issues for China, the Chinese People's Bank is essentially just letting the value of the yuan depreciate naturally, while the United States dollar is, of course, strengthening because of the strong economy that we have. And so you have a divergence to the extremes of both of our currencies,
doesn't that give us leverage? Does it give us more leverage over them? Because we've got a dollar going up, and that's stronger. Yet the yuan, it went down like 9%. So I mean, the Chinese, they got to look at this, because we're basically the big boys on the block when it comes to this situation.
It's not that simple. A stronger dollar means Americans buy more, which means we have a larger trade deficit. So, if your trade deficit is the one thing that you really want to address, then, that's not necessarily good for this. For China itself, it's not necessarily against the U.S. dollar devaluing that it should really be worried about. It's against all the other currencies in the world, too. As the U.S. dollar, we are strengthening, but the yuan itself is devaluing against these other things. So for China, though, I mean, the currency, I think, is a big factor, but it's so much more. It's structural reform. It's the things that, the U.S. government actually truly wants from out of China. But, I think the trade war on top of all that kind of it makes it harder to really get into the meat of those discussions. But again, hopefully the talks this week will sort of lead a path to that.
All right, we'll see what happens with those talks, and of course, if the two presidents meet by November, maybe they'll have it straightened out. And finally, quickly, this report from the Pentagon that the Chinese are actually training pilots, and they've increased the range of their bombers to potentially target U.S. assets in the Pacific. That seems like a real potential threat.
From my understanding, it's not unnatural for countries to, target potential adversaries as scenarios. Potentially one day you might have this threat that you might have to address. And so the United States, I mean, we recognize China as a potential security threat. Same with Russia. And so, we train in ways that it would potentially be able to alleviate those threats or concerns that we would have one day. Right now, the U.S. government is investing in our military, so we're going to be tough on China on these things coming forward, and so I'm not too worried about that.